The conference room smelled like old leather and expensive cologne. Roland sat at the far end of the mahogany table, his fingers drumming against the armrest of a chair that cost more than his first car. Around him, the Thornfield family had gathered like wolves circling a kill his brother's Cameron, and Douglas in their tailored suits, his sister Victoria with her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against her phone screen, and his parents, Richard and Eleanor Thornfield, sitting at the head of the table with expressions carved from stone. The lawyer, a thin man named Peterson, with wire-rimmed glasses that caught the afternoon light, shuffled through documents with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Roland had always hated lawyers. They spoke in a language designed to confuse, to obfuscate, to make simple things complicated. But today, Peterson's words were crystal clear. To Cameron Thornfield, I bequeath the Connecticut estate, the investment portfolio managed by Aldrich & Sons, and a sum of $10 million. Cameron nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. To Douglas Thornfield, the Manhattan penthouse, the shares in Thornfield Industries, and a sum of $10 million. Douglas didn't even look up from his phone. To Victoria Thornfield, the summer home in the Hamptons, the art collection, and a sum of $11 million. Roland's heart was hammering now. He did the math in his head. $31 million, divided among 3 siblings. The Thornfield fortune was vast, accumulated over 3 generations of ruthless business deals and carefully orchestrated marriages. His father had built an empire on real estate and technology investments. His mother came from old money, the kind that whispered through New England society like a ghost. Peterson cleared his throat and looked down at the papers. And Roland noticed something change in the man's expression, a flicker of discomfort, quickly masked. And to Roland. The lawyer paused, reaching into a leather folder and producing a single envelope. To Roland Thornfield, a sum of $50,000. The room fell silent. Not the comfortable silence of people processing information, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a secret finally surfacing. Roland stared at the envelope on the table in front of him. $50,000. He had expected less than his siblings he always had. Cameron was the eldest, the golden child who had followed their father into business. Douglas had the charisma, the connections. Victoria had married into the Ashford family, cementing their social position. But Roland had always been the odd one out, the quiet one who preferred books to boardrooms, who had chosen to teach literature at a community college instead of joining the family business. But $50,000? Against $31 million? There must be some mistake. Roland heard himself say, his voice sounding distant and hollow. Peterson looked at Richard Thornfield, who sat motionless, his hands folded on the table. Eleanor wouldn't meet Roland's eyes. She was staring at a spot on the wall behind him, her face pale and drawn. "There's no mistake," Richard said finally, his voice carrying the same cold authority Roland had heard his entire life. "The will is quite specific. Dad, I don't understand." "There's a note," Peterson interrupted, sliding a piece of paper across the polished wood. Roland's hands trembled as he picked it up. The handwriting was his, Mother's elegant, flowing script that she had taught him to recognize when he was 5 years old, sitting at the kitchen table practicing his letters. For being with our family all these years. 7 words. 7 words that cracked open his entire existence like an egg dropped on concrete. "What does this mean?" Roland demanded, but he already knew. Somewhere deep in his bones, in the place where intuition lives, he already knew. Richard Thornfield stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "It means exactly what it says, Roland. You've been with our family. But you were never of it." The room tilted. Roland gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "I don't? What are you saying?" Eleanor finally looked at him, and Roland saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. Not love, not even pity. Just exhaustion. The exhaustion of carrying a lie for 32 years. "You're not our biological son," she said quietly. We adopted you when you were 3 days old, we thought. We thought we were doing the right thing. But you were never really ours." Cameron and Douglas exchanged glances. Victoria kept her eyes on her phone, but Roland could see the tension in her shoulders. They had known. Of course they had known. Probably for years. And they had said nothing. "Who?" Roland whispered. "Who are my real parents?" "We don't know," Richard said, but the lie was transparent. Roland had spent 32 years reading his father's. Tells, the slight tightening around his eyes when he bluffed at poker, the way his jaw clenched when he was cornered in a negotiation. "You're lying." "This meeting is over," Richard announced, gathering his papers. "Peterson, please ensure Roland receives his inheritance check within the week." Roland stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to drop a bomb like this and walk away. I deserve answers. I deserve the truth." "What you deserve," Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, "is exactly what you've received. $50,000 is generous considering the circumstances. Be grateful we gave you anything at all." The words hit Roland like a physical blow. Be grateful. For 32 years of lies. For being raised in a family that had never really claimed him. For discovering that every birthday, every Christmas, every moment of what he thought was love had been nothing more than obligation. He walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. 3 weeks later, Roland sat in a cramped office that smelled like coffee and desperation. Marcus Chen, private investigator, had come highly recommended, or as highly recommended as anyone could be in the business of digging up secrets people wanted to stay buried. Chen was in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of face that blended into crowds, perfect for his line of work. "Closed adoptions from 32 years ago are tough," Chen said, leaning back in his chair. "But not impossible. You said the Thornfields are wealthy." "Very. Then there's a paper trail. Rich people always leave paper trails. They can't help themselves. They need lawyers, accountants, people to make their problems disappear. And people talk. People always talk." It took Chen 3 months. 3 months of following leads that went nowhere, of bribing clerks and charming secretaries, of piecing together fragments of a story that had been deliberately shattered. Roland spent those months in a fog, going through the motions of his life while feeling like he was watching himself from a distance. He taught his classes. He graded papers. He avoided his phone when the Thornfield name appeared on the screen. When Chen finally called, his voice was different. "Careful. You need to come to my office, now." The file Chen spread. Across his desk was thick, stuffed with documents and photographs. "Your birth mother's name was Sarah Brennan," Chen began. "She was 19 when she got pregnant with you. Working-class family from Boston, big dreams. She wanted to be a writer." Roland stared at a photograph of a young woman, with dark hair and eyes that looked startlingly like his own. She was smiling in the picture, caught mid-laugh, unaware that the camera was capturing her. "She met your father at a charity gala in 1992. She was waitressing to pay for college. He was." Chen paused, pulling out another photograph. He was Mitchell Cray. The name meant nothing to Roland for exactly 3 seconds. Then recognition slammed into him like a freight train. Mitchell Cray. The Mitchell Cray, owner of Craytech Industries, one of the largest technology conglomerates in America. A man whose net worth was estimated at somewhere north of $8 billion. A man whose face appeared on the covers of Forbes and Business Week. "That's impossible," Roland breathed. "DNA doesn't lie," Chen said, tapping another document. "I managed to get a sample from a water glass at a Craytech board meeting. Compared it to the cheek swab you gave me. 99.9% match. Mitchell Cray is your biological father." Roland's hands were shaking. Did he know? Does he know? That's where it gets complicated. Chen pulled out more documents, bank statements, legal agreements, wire transfers. "Sarah," Brennan received a one-time payment of $200,000 in 1992, shortly before you were born. The payment came from a shell corporation that traces back to Kraytech Legal. There was an agreement she would give up the baby for adoption to a family of their choosing, and she would never contact Mitchell Cray or make any claims against him. The Thornfields, Roland said numbly, business associates of Cray's. Richard Thornfield was handling some real estate deals for Kraytech at the time. Eleanor Thornfield had suffered 3 miscarriages and couldn't carry a pregnancy to term. It was convenient, clean. Everyone got what they wanted. Except me. Jen's expression softened. Except you. But here's what you need to understand, Roland. Mitchell Cray didn't forget about you. Look at this. He spread out more documents, financial records, spanning decades. That scholarship you received to Phillips Academy, funded by a Kraytech foundation. Your acceptance to Yale despite your mediocre SAT scores. Cray is a major donor, and his office made a call. That teaching position at Monroe Community College when you were 25 and had no experience? The college had just received a $2 million grant from Kraytech for their humanities program. Roland felt like he was drowning. Every opportunity, every break, every door that had mysteriously opened in his life, it had all been orchestrated by a man he had never met. A man who had paid to erase his existence, and then spent 32 years puppeteering his life from the shadows. Why? Roland whispered. Why would he do that? Guilt, maybe. Responsibility. Or maybe he's just the kind of man who needs to control everything, even the son he gave away. Jen closed the file. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Roland didn't answer. He took the file and walked out into the evening air, the weight of 32 years of lies pressing down on his shoulders. He waited 2 weeks before making the call. 2 weeks of reading everything he could find about Mitchell Cray, the boy from nothing who had built an empire, the ruthless businessman who crushed competitors and bought politicians, the philanthropist who had donated millions to education and health care, a man of contradictions, a man who had given him life and then paid to make him disappear. The receptionist at Kraytech was polite but firm. Mr. Cray didn't take unsolicited calls. Roland left his name and number anyway, not expecting anything. Mitchell Cray called him back 30 minutes later. Roland. The voice was deep, measured, with the faintest trace of a Brooklyn accent smoothed over by decades of power. I've been wondering when you would reach out. You knew I would? I hoped you would. Can we meet? They met at a restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place where privacy cost as much as the food. Mitchell Cray was 61 years old, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Roland saw himself in those eyes, the same shape, the same intensity. It was like looking into a mirror that showed him his future. You look like your mother, Cray said after they had ordered. Sarah. You have her eyes. Is she alive? She died 6 years ago. Cancer. I made sure she had the best care, but... He trailed off, something like regret flickering across his face. I sent flowers to the funeral. Anonymously. How generous of you. Cray's expression hardened. I was 28 years old, Roland. I had just taken Kraytech public. I was married badly, but married. Sarah was a mistake. A beautiful mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I did what powerful men do when they're afraid. I threw money at the problem and made it disappear. I'm not a problem. I'm your son. Yes, Cray said simply. You are, and I've been watching you your entire life, trying to make up for what I did. The scholarship, the college, the job, all of it. I wanted to give you opportunities. I wanted you to succeed. Without ever knowing who you were, without ever giving me a choice. Would you have wanted to know? Cray leaned forward. Would you have wanted to grow up as my secret? The proof of my infidelity? I had a wife, Roland, 2 legitimate children, a reputation. What kind of life would you have had as my dirty little secret? Maybe better than the one I had, Roland shot back. The Thornfields never wanted me. I was just a prop in their perfect family picture. They gave me scraps while my so-called siblings inherited millions. At least if I had known the truth, I would have known where I stood. Cray was silent for a long moment. "You're right," he said finally. "You deserved better. From all of us. From me, from the Thornfields, from your mother. We all failed you." He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "This is a contract. If you sign it, you become a full heir to my estate. Equal shares with your half-siblings. Access to everything, money, properties, the company. Your name becomes Cray. Legally, publicly, I'll announce you as my son." Roland stared at the envelope. Everything he had ever wanted handed to him on a silver platter. Wealth, recognition, a father who claimed him. What's the catch? No catch, just a choice. You sign this, and your life changes. The media will tear into you. Your half-siblings will hate you. They already resent having to share the inheritance. The Thornfields will feel betrayed. Your entire world will explode, but you'll have the truth. And you'll have me, for whatever that's worth. Roland thought about the Thornfields, sitting in that conference room, dividing their fortune while tossing him scraps. He thought about 32 years of feeling like he didn't belong, of sensing something was wrong but never being able to name it. He thought about his mother, Sarah Brennan, who had given him up and died without ever knowing what happened to her son. "I need time," Roland said. "Take all the time you need." Cray stood up, leaving a business card on the table. "But Roland, whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of you. You became a good man despite everything we did. That's not nothing." Roland didn't sign the contract. Not that day, or the next week, or even the next month. He sat with it, letting the weight of the decision press against him. He thought about what he would gain: wealth, power, a name that meant something. And he thought about what he would lose: the last remnants of the life he had known, however false it had been. In the end, it was a phone call from Victoria that made his decision for him. His sister, his former sister, called him drunk at 2 a.m. "You know what the worst part is?" she slurred. "You were always the best of us, the only one who actually gave a damn about anything other than money. And we treated you like garbage because you weren't blood. Because Mom and Dad never let us forget that you weren't really one of us." "Victoria, sign whatever Cray is offering you," she said. "Get your money, get your revenge. We deserve it." She hung up before he could respond. Roland signed the contract the next day. The announcement hit the media like a bomb. "Billionaire Mitchell Cray reveals secret son." The headlines screamed for weeks. Roland's face was plastered across every tabloid, every website. His half-siblings, Marcus and Jennifer. Cray released a cold statement through their lawyers, contesting the inheritance. The Thornfields said nothing publicly, but Roland heard through old friends that Richard had suffered a mild heart attack and that Eleanor had checked into a rehabilitation facility for exhaustion. Roland felt no satisfaction in their pain. Only a hollow kind of sadness for all the years they had wasted, all of them, pretending to be something they weren't. Mitchell Cray kept his promises. Roland's name was legally changed to Roland Cray. He was given an office at Craytech, a seat on the board, and access to accounts that held more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But more than that, Cray gave him time, long dinners where they talked about everything and nothing, weekends at the estate in Vermont, slow and awkward attempts to build something that resembled a relationship. It wasn't perfect. Roland still felt like an outsider in the Cray world, just as he had in the Thornfield world. But it was honest. Finally, brutally honest. 1 year after signing the contract, Roland stood in his new office overlooking Manhattan. The city glittered below him, 1,000 points of light in the darkness. His phone buzzed a message from Mitchell asking if he wanted to grab dinner. Roland smiled and typed back a yes. He had spent 32 years searching for where he belonged. He still wasn't sure he had found it. But, for the first time in his life, he wasn't pretending. He knew who he was, Roland Cray, son of Sarah Brennan and Mitchell Cray, raised by the Thornfields, belonging fully to none of them and partly to all of them. It wasn't the ending he had imagined when he walked out of that conference room. But it was real. And after a lifetime of lies, real was enough.